Peace and blessings, everyone. I'm excited to be back at this conference. I'm very grateful to Paula and Adam for merging these scientific voices and spiritual voices in this space. I was very excited to meet Rabbi Ellen Bernstein last year at the same conference, and I met Hayat Imam during a phone planning meeting for this year's spiritual panel. And to me, it's evident that their lives are very prayer for a more livable earth. In that brief collective moment of our planning call, I experienced their power, their clarity, and their commitment to open new relationships to our land and to one another. I'm very grateful to be in their company as we collectively curate wisdom and birth more integrated ways of being human in our relationships with Earth. I believe this panel represents the depth of the environmental movement through Ellen's 30 years of leading a national environmental movement. And I believe this panel represents the breadth of the environmental movement through Hayat's national and international activism across the United States, in Manila, Beijing, other countries. So I invite you to not only listen, but to absorb their practical wisdom. I believe each of them are going to share insights for 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. Rabbi Ellen Bernstein and Hayat Imam, we welcome you.
Thank you. I titled my talk, "The Challenges and Opportunities of Religious Language." And my work is really in the field of eco-philosophy, and I look at Bible from an ecological perspective. Since I was a young person, I recognized the environmental crisis as a spiritual one. We treat the natural world as an object for our use, not as a subject with whom we live in relation. We treat the natural world as an it, not as a thou, in philosopher Martin Buber's terminology. While I was born Jewish, I grew up in an assimilated family that had long abandoned Jewish religion and tradition. Nature was my temple. I studied ecology in high school in the late 60s, attended one of the first environment programs in the United States at UC Berkeley, and taught biology and ecology in high school. It was only after immersing myself in ecological thinking and living that I was drawn to Judaism, because in it I found a language that captured a deep ecological sensibility, both poetic and reverential, to me more poignant and moving than the secular scientific language, which often seemed flat and dispassionate. Early in my journey, I was grabbed by the vision of the biblical prophet Ezekiel. He saw the primordial temple planted in the midst of the Garden of Eden. The temple itself, sustained by living, healing waters, gave rise to gigantic trees whose fruit was for food and leaves for healing. I was intrigued to see that the Bible recognized the interdependence of the temple and the garden, a holy interdependence of elements, the earth, the water, the air, and the sanctuary. That the Bible spoke an ecological language captivated me. I saw in it a potent strategy for motivating and organizing religious audiences to care. So in 1988, after looking for many years for a Jewish organization dedicated to the care of nature and finding none, I founded the first Jewish environmental organization, Shomrei Adamah, which means keepers of the earth. While I have worked over the decades to articulate a kind of Jewish eco-philosophy drawing on the Hebrew Bible, which is rich in earth-centered wisdom, the greatest challenge I have faced is the minefield of religious language. Religious language, while deeply meaningful and satisfying to me, is frequently off-putting to my secular friends. Too often, religious and secular eschew each other and miss the opportunity to build a powerful environmental movement. Communicating across the divides is imperative. We need each other and the diversity of our voices to magnify our common purpose of ensuring the Earth's well-being. So the first idea I must discuss, which may be challenging to my secular friends, is the idea of God. So much damage has been done over the centuries in the name of God and religion that many people are skittish about the possibility that religion could have anything constructive to say about ecology or anything for that matter. And many are dismissive of God language because they associate God with a miracle-making patriarch in the sky. Their rejection is understandable since on the surface, biblical God language is anthropomorphic. God is described in human terms. But the sages said that speaking of God in human terms was a device to bring God down to earth and make God more accessible. The Bible is a work of spiritual literature filled with word plays, parallelisms, foreshadowing, metaphor, and in my opinion is meant to be read as story, not history. It is intentionally vague and porous to provoke questions and engage the reader or listener in a conversation and a community. Reading biblical texts is necessarily a matter of digging beneath the surface. Indeed, surface interpretations can be dangerous. The difficulty of speaking about God is complicated by the range of individual and personal understandings and experiences of God. But let me offer my thoughts. For as long as I can remember, I have understood God in ecological terms. As a young person, I would walk to synagogue with my father on the Jewish New Year. My dad spoke little, but he loved being outdoors, and our synagogue walk was one of life's simple and sublime pleasures. For my father, God was everywhere. Together, silently, we would admire the changing season and the reddening leaves. We relished the crispness of the air and felt the holiness of time. Walking to synagogue was where the encounter with God took place. The rhythm of our walking and the quiet rippling of our breath was more enlivening than actually being in synagogue. Early on, the Bible identifies God as the wind or breath that animates all living things. In the second verse of the Bible, God is called Ruach Elohim, the breath of God. And on those crisp fall mornings, this was the God I was introduced to. I had never had any sense of a bearded patriarch in the sky that lives on in the popular imagination. God is the energy, a kind of force field, the space that connects us. God is the unbounded, the infinite, the eternal. God is the oneness that contains everything, the ultimate web of life. That Judaism recognizes this web of oneness in the primary affirmation of Jewish faith, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," confirmed to me that Judaism was the tradition that I belonged to. That God is the unbounded, infinite life force beyond categorization is evident in God's name. In Judaism, God's proper name was never to be uttered, since to reduce God to a word would be to bind God, to turn God into a thing, to turn a process, a verb, into a noun, and to desecrate God. One of God's names in Judaism is simply Hashem, which means the name. I love the irony, the helplessness of naming the one that cannot be named, the name. The whole concept and possibility of God as an energy field, a web bigger than humans, has always felt to me like a most potent antidote to anthropocentrism, the human-centeredness, the human willfulness that many environmentalists consider the beginning of all of our environmental problems. The Bible is as much a God-centered story as it is a human one. And that God-centeredness translates into a centering of biological, geological, meteorological processes, the natural law. There are more ecological consequences to the God-centeredness of the Bible. Chief among them is the rabbinic concept of ownerlessness. If the earth belongs to God as it does in the Bible, then in theory anyway, God owns everything, which means that people do not. While people might own property in the short term, in principle, in the long run, we can't own anything. We are tenants on the land. This theory plays out practically through the sabbatical year, the 7th year, and the Jubilee, the 49th year. The Bible recounts that on the 7th year, the land itself needs a year to recuperate and rest, free from the handling, the interference of humans. On the 49th year, all debts were to be forgiven, and all of the property that had been taken by others for unpaid debts must be returned to the original families, ensuring that there would be no accumulation of land, no excessive wealth, and every family would have their own plot from which they could grow their crops and have agency over their own lives. This idea is a powerful acknowledgement that the land has a life of its own. It is a remedy for a culture of inequality in which owning things is a primary indicator of a successful life. The other biblical word which riles many environmentalists, be they secular or religious, is the word dominion. I'm referring to Genesis 1:28, in which humanity is given dominion over the earth and its creatures. The verse goes like this: God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and increase, fill the earth and master it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth. Over the past 50 years, thousands of articles and even entire books have been written on this verse, arguing the meaning of dominion. Many people have claimed that this verse gives humanity a mandate to control nature and have blamed the Bible for our environmental problems. However, while many associate the word dominion with domination and exploitation, we could just as easily associate it with domain, domicile, dame, and madam. In other words, dominion assumes the earth is our home and our job is to maintain it. Read in context, the word dominion has a positive valence. The entire chapter in which the word dominion occurs is an ode to creation, to all of nature. In it, we learn of the goodness, the integrity of every creature, the primacy of seeds, the importance of diversity and sustainability, and the significance of an ecological system that will last in perpetuity. The culminating goodness, the singular phrase, very good, is not ascribed to people as most assume, but rather to all creatures living in harmony together. Genesis 1 is a love song to the earth, so it makes no sense that God would encourage people to exploit the earth. Indeed, in this verse, dominion over the creation is given to humanity as a blessing. As a blessing, the creation is a gift. The anthropologist Lewis Hyde wrote, "The recipients of the gift become custodians of the gift." The root meaning for the word custodian is care for children. It implies humility. We are here as custodians of the earth. We are here to care for the earth as a most intimate relation, like a child, a parent, a beloved. The great theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer insisted that dominion is an act of participation, never an act of injustice. Dominion is about our service to the one, to all the creatures, the whole web of life. Bonhoeffer refers to the creatures of the natural world as my kin and my relationship. He employs the word my to express the deepest caring and intimacy, not a sense of ownership. He laments that if we do not regard the earth and its creatures as my kin, if we abuse our dominion and grab it for ourselves, only then does dominion become domination, and we are no longer worthy of the role we have been given. We lose our kinship with God as we lose our kinship with the earth. While there's much more to say, I must stop here. I hope I have left you with a few things to consider. As you think about partners for your ecologically centered work, remember that some religious communities may be enthusiastic collaborators. And secondly, I invite all of us to notice our reaction to various words or ideas. Are there words that cause us to distance ourselves from others? When you notice yourself reacting to a particular word, take a moment to be curious, the way you would be about the natural world and all of its incredible intricacies, and let your curiosity lead the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That gives me a whole new perspective.
Well, I'm glad. That is my hope. So I don't see anything. I don't see any of you. So I don't know if Adam has questions, or if there's questions in the chat, or if you want to take them and hand them.
We'll do that after Hayat speaks.
Oh, okay.
Hello, this is Hayat. Hi, everyone. Adam, I think Ellen and I spoke, and we thought it might flow better if we just have the questions to her now.
Oh, that's fine with me.
Okay.
So we've got a lot of enthusiastic responses, Ellen.
Okay.
But I don't see any questions yet.
I actually do have a question, and
oh, please go ahead, Holly.
And thank you so much. That is so heartwarming and all right up my alley. I recently read a book by Matthew Sleeth, MD, called Reforesting Faith, and I wanted to know if you'd read it yet. I think it's probably pretty new, but it talks about all the myriad references to trees in the Bible, which I just found mind-blowing. I was raised Southern Baptist. So it was just like, what? There are all these trees in the Bible, what? And my question with that, because of that book, and also because I think that there's a book called Trees of the Bible or something like that as well, is that are you witnessing kind of a reclaiming from various religious traditions this ecological understanding and reverie and tie with spirituality? Are you seeing that? And if you are, could you give a couple examples?
Sure, thank you. That's such a great question. I really appreciate it. I've definitely heard of Matthew Sleeth, but I haven't read the book, and I will go get it. And yes, there are tons of references to trees in the Bible. And one of the things I want to say is most encounters with God that happen in the Hebrew Bible are in the environs of like a tree or a bush or by the river. It's like, when you read closely, you see that every time there's this encounter, it happens with some aspect of nature. So I'm very excited about this whole, I love the idea of reforesting faith. And I'll speak there, in the Jewish world, what is most exciting, I think, and I think that this goes for tons of Jewish people around the United States, is that there's a huge farming movement. And it's been sort of embraced. But whereas like some of the work that I would do would take longer to be embraced by the establishment, because it's philosophical and it's more on the edge. But the Jewish farming work has totally taken off. And so now, because Jewish institutions can see how it's relevant to them and the young Jewish kids, basically. So lots of synagogues have gardens and farms, and lots of Jewish institutions now, like JCC's, Jewish community centers, are turning their land into farms. And I know that that's true in the Christian world as well. I haven't kept up with everything, but I know that there is some organization, of which I can't remember the name, that is working with church lands and turning them into like forest reserves and that kind of a thing. that organization definitely exists. I just can't remember.
I can chime in here. I'm Mary Beth Lorbecki, and I've written following St. Francis on the Catholic movement and Laudato Si from that. But I'm part of the National Religious Coalition on Creation Care. And I know Matthew Sleeth, and his book is fabulous. And but there's a huge movement, and David Krantz, who was part of Jewcology and ITSM, he's working, and the Green Muslims and the Buddhists, and there's a huge movement. And I'm the program director of Interfaith Oceans, and then I'm working with Christians for the Mountains on anti-mountaintop removal. And so like on our website for Interfaith Oceans, we've tried to collect the different, just a taste of the different support for creation care from different traditional perspectives, so that people can apply it to ocean care, which of course are connected to the forest care and the farm care and the justice and all these issues, and seafood slavery. And I mean, just, it's, as you all know, so integrated. But I just so appreciate what you've just talked about, the language and trying to translate between science and faith for the same concepts, because they really are the same ecological concepts: unity, diversity, strength, attending to respect, to non-ownership, not making everything a commodity, and to letting things live. And the more we can help bridge the language gaps, and for churches and synagogues and everything else, they're losing their youth. So there is a reason to have a benefit of making this leap into seeing the connections between science and faith, because there's work to be done, and youth see the connections often that the adults can't, because they're in more narrow perspectives. And so there is a benefit to for the churches to expand their vision besides their justice call, and it makes their faith so much deeper. Like you're saying, your walk to the synagogue, where things really happen on the walk, and in your neighborhoods with the people and everything. So anyway, I just want to say thank you, and it's wonderful, and keep up the great work, everybody. This is fabulous. So I'll get offline.
At this point, I think we need to move on to Hayat.
Can I just tell people where to find my work, which is www.ellenbernstein.org and www.thepromiseoftheland.com. So I have lots of books and tons of material on those sites. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Hayat.
Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I am so sorry this time is so short for us. I would have loved to have heard a lot more from Ellen.
Excuse me, Hayat. If you and Ellen are available at 1:30, you could do a workshop, and then you could carry on this conversation for another hour or more if you want to.
Well, how about if we see what kind of response there is? I think we can decide that later, but that's a lovely offer.
Sure.
Thank you so much. So salam alaikum again. May each of you feel peace in your lives in this tough time. My name is again Hayat Imam. I'll be sharing some thoughts today from my reference point as a Muslim. It's a privilege to share this hour with Ellen and with all of you. So I'd like to begin with a memory from my childhood. When my brothers and I did something especially naughty, my dad would scold us. But the most serious reprimand that he had for us would be his exasperated comment, "Have you lost your sense of proportion?" And back then, we really didn't have a clue what he was talking about, but we knew that we had done something very wrong. And we did pick up that losing one's sense of proportion was a serious error. I think that early lesson about avoiding extremes of behavior, about the importance of moderation, the beauty of balance, has stayed with us. And as we learned our lessons as Muslims, learning to pray and reading the Quran, we could see that the values of keeping to the middle path are qualities that are also recommended to us by Islam. So aspiring to a life of balance should be our goal. Yet when we look at our world today, it's pretty evident that we have strayed very far from the golden mean. Instead, what we see is a world of imbalance, extreme levels of income inequality, extreme uses of natural resources, extreme differences in power between people, between countries, and sadly, we see extreme power over nature. I'd like to suggest that one reason for this malaise is that we have fallen into the most fundamental imbalance of all. That is the extreme power differential between men and women. In all societies, decision-making power rests overwhelmingly in the hands of men only. In the Muslim world, which is a patriarchy like everywhere else, the interpretation of the Quran, our holy book, has been the domain of men to the exclusion of the voices of women. So this, I believe, is actually a tremendous misfortune for all Muslims, because they have thus been deprived of half the consensus and wisdom of how a society should be conducted. I want to be clear that I'm not proposing replacing all male decision-making by all female decision makers, because that would be another form of imbalance. This problem must be solved by creating a whole, not just another unbalanced half. So I want to apply this logic to a specific dilemma, which is the question that lurks at the periphery of our consciousness. What is our purpose here on earth? The Muslim Holy Quran gives us a reason that we are here as vice regents of God. But how are we to interpret that? From the state of the environment, we can conclude that the interpreters, mostly men until now, have understood vice regent to mean we are the rulers, the owners, the consumers of this earth. We have felt no qualms about taking all its gifts and using it for our own benefit. But for discerning minds, the Quran contains many verses that admonish us to cherish nature. Thus, vice regent can have another meaning entirely, particularly if women's sensibilities, logic, and experience are added to the mix. We are not here to rule the earth. We are here to serve and to protect. We must think of this earth and all living things as a trust given to our care. How, you may ask, am I confident that adding women to the decision-making will help us reach this end? It's because over millennia, our forefathers and our foremothers showed us another way of caring for the earth. Above all, they showed cooperation as they gathered and hunted, collected seeds and farmed, as they tended to the soil, domesticated animals. They learned how to divide up the work, understood when it was time to take and when to stop. Of course, increasing food production was probably our downfall in some ways. The granaries full of grain allowed bureaucracies to develop, along with rulers, with money, with civilization, corruption, and wars. The world changed. It turned into a centralized linear space where women lost their voices in the public sphere and were relegated to the home. But we are in a new moment now. As we face the collapse of human existence, women are stepping up as leaders addressing environmental changes and challenges in every corner of the earth, as keepers of ecological knowledge, as organizers of civil society, as protectors of water, Women are taking their place at the forefront of the struggle of climate justice and sometimes getting murdered for it. Today, our concern for the climate crisis has brought us together here. But let's also address this coronavirus moment. As a Muslim, I feel the coronavirus pandemic is bringing us a message. I'm reading this as God's way of giving us a small taste of what a full-fledged climate change disaster could look like. Ultimately, the coronavirus pandemic is reversible and it will end. But it may leave us with some valuable lessons for addressing global warming. At the very least, it will show us the stark questions we may have to ask. How much preparation is urgently required to make a difference? How much preparation, and who are the most vulnerable communities? How much care will we give them? What kind of leaders do we need? And it may become earth-shatteringly clear that this earth is our only boat. And if we allow it to become leaky, we will all go down together. But if we all row together, we may get somewhere. We still have time. This is when we have to find the best in us and join our best together. On that road, two questions could motivate and challenge us. The first question was posed by Bernie Sanders, one of our visionaries and heroes. Are we willing to fight for the person standing next to us, even if that fight is not our fight? And secondly, are we willing to give up some of our privilege if that will contribute to greater justice? For me, a verse from the Quran helps me to tackle these two questions, and I'd like to share that with you. This is from chapter 4, verse 135. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of God, most giving, most compassionate. O you who have chosen to be graced with belief, stand up firmly for justice, a witness for God, even if it is against yourselves, your parents, and your relatives, and whether the case is of a rich person or a poor person. I'd really love to hear your reflections now, perhaps on these questions, on anything else you have to ask. But to give you time to consider these two questions, we will do a quick breakout and partner you with another person. And you'll have 4 minutes where perhaps you can share, each of you share 2 minutes on some of these issues and reflect on these questions, which are now actually in your chat box, I think. I hope so. Yeah. So I think our friend John will try to pair us up now. I'll be part of the pair, and Ellen as well will be part of the pair.
I don't know why, but on an emotional level, I always just go back to the Garden of Eden when I'm thinking about environmental work. It's like a lodestar for me. I just think of a time when nature wasn't spoiled, wasn't hurt.
Mm.
And I'm just saying something simple where I'm just saying that's where I dip into as a source of strength.
Mm.
There's an African proverb that says, if you know the beginning well, the end will not trouble you. And so that is a practice I take as well, because if we go back to the beginning, it was perfect, whole, and complete, and we were asked to keep it.
I was thinking too of the Rilke quote, I beg you to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. And then it goes on, live the questions now, perhaps then someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer.
I just recently saw something on somebody's email. They signed their email by saying, soil is the answer. The question is irrelevant. And for me, that was like right on. It's like I rest in the, everything is related to what the earth that is holding me.
We have to love soil for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's what we grew out of, and we carry on growing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's what gives us our food. We're very connected.
I think that I like this vision that win-win situations are the best solution for nature and for us, where we live in harmony with nature. And I like to imagine a world where people live in harmony with nature. And I mean, maybe it's your Garden of Eden that I imagine, and that it's possible to live without harming nature and only taking and not taking care of what's around us.